Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the book club this evening. We have competition today in the shape of tennis going on at Stern, but I do hope those who haven't made it here will watch the presentation later. So today we are welcoming Indu Kulkarni, who has been a professor of literature, and now she focuses on writing and painting. She joins us from Belgaum, and she's going to talk to us about Robert Frost and his poetry. Now, Robert Frost, I think, is a poet that most of us hold very dear, but I think there are a few poems that we're all familiar with. You know, The Road Not Taken, and Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, Apple Picking. But I'm sure Indu will tell us about more than just these few that we all know. So I look forward to your presentation, Indu. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about Robert Frost, popular American poet, and I've called this talk Point Counterpoint to convey to you the kind of contradictions that have been always in the life of Frost, and to convey to you that in a long poem called Lesson for Today, he winds up by saying, and were an epitaph to be written on the stone, I'd like the line, I had a lover's quarrel with the world. And with this, I'd like to continue my talk. My talk will cover American poetry very briefly, 20th century, biography of Robert Frost, a visit to Frost Place in 1998, the themes and arguments in the poems that I have selected, and the timeless universal appeal of the poet and his poems. Next slide, please. Looking at the picture of American poetry in the land of freedom in the 20th century, where America is the crucible of cultures, a melting pot of so many races, colorful, beautiful, but troubled people. We have the Italians, the Germans, the English, the Blacks, the Americans, the Native Americans, and so many people. And in the 20th century, a feeling of some kind of an angst or alienation was what colored the times. The alienation was partly because of this expatriation of the migrants who had come from all over and tried to make a living. And then was a sign of a movement from the rural areas into the urban areas, and the giving up of their lives there, coming to New York, to Boston, to the city areas, and keeping in a search for the suitable style in modern writing, keeping the cultural and social context. We have great writers, Hemingway, Faulkner, Eugene O'Neill. We come to the poets, Edgar Allan Poe, Robert Frost, Ezra Pound, Wallace Stevens, all made the scene, and we find that they're all deserving of great literary intelligence in response to the shift to the city and the new painting styles. But the poets kept to their native joys in finding truth, which I will now point out in Frost in particular. Next slide, please.
Just 1 second. Can Indu become the speaker along the, or is she visible?
We are looking at the life of Robert Frost, born in California of a long line of New Englanders in 1874. Part Scottish and English descent, there's a lot of contradictions in his life, and these continued throughout his life. He wrote his first poem in school. He did odd jobs in New Hampshire, but his first love was poetry. And this particular thought of enjoying poetry did not meet Ezra Pound till his first book, A Boy's Will, was out in England in 1930. The two poets were at odds, for Pound said that his poems were simple, and Frost said it's subtle too. So we keep this point in mind to what Pound said later on when he liked Frost's poetry. He married Eleanor White, his sweetheart from school. They had 6 children, and his family always wanted him to improve his academic performance. And Frost's aim, on the other hand, was to impose the intonations of speech on traditional metrical patterns in order to create a sound of sense. So he went on writing poetry, and yet he was a farmer. So he was given dairy farm for 10 years. It was like a contract. And here he labored, but all the time we find that his heart was in poetry. Thus was born A Boy's Will, which then was put together. And then we have North of Boston, with the Death of Hired Man and Home Burial and other lyrics. There are 2 sets of them. In A Boy's Will, we have lyrics which sing. And in North of Boston, we have narrative poems which talk to us about situations. At this time, he got fed up of America, and their family moved to London. And there they went to a farm, sometime Gloucestershire, somewhere. Eleanor said, I want to live under thatch. And so they tried farming. But all this time, in England too, he was busy writing poetry. The Georgian poets, Edward Thomas and others, were listening to the voice of Frost. And when A Boy's Will was first published, the English audience liked his frank, free, simple style, sincere, and they enjoyed his poetry, and he was appreciated. So he published North of Boston. And this particular book was also received with great joy. And we find that Frost was like a celebrity in England. But he decided sometime in 1915 to come back to America just when the World War had broken out. And when he came back, he was pleasantly surprised that he didn't have to knock at doors. If he tapped, he was a literary genius. All the doors opened, and he was delighted. He got the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. He was a member of the American Academy of Arts, and he was called to Tufts College to deliver the Phi Beta Kappa lecture. And we find that he became more and more confident as time went on. And all the time, when his family thought that he would go to Harvard, get his degree. He liked the classics, but he did not graduate. And he came to another farm in New Hampshire. And this is where people appreciated that here was a poet without sham, without affectation. And this is what then Pound said, if I wanted to be a farmer, I would understand what farming is all about by reading the poems of Frost. He became a major force in revolutionary styles in modern poetry because he tried to imitate the intonations of speech of the rural folk. At war with Pound's dictum that all great art is born of the metropolis, Frost searched for truth with arguments. Particular little poem is there, The Secret Sits. We dance around in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows. So Frost framed humanity in his poems. We have Tree at My Window, Mending Wall, the host of memorable experiences in verse. And finally, we find that he was invited by Kennedy to read a poem as a national poet in 1960, and the famous poem, The Gift Outright. Here we see that the poet had come into his own, and that is how the joy of being a great poet laureate sat lightly on his shoulders. He was not one to boast or ever to talk about his gift, but the public realized the humility of a great mind. He is on par with W.B. Yeats, with T.S. Eliot, with other greats of the time. And truth has always been his central passion. He was a worker, he was a dreamer, and the pulse of his poetry is timed to the heartbeat of the workday world, whether it is after apple picking or mending wall, it is poetry in action. And the themes are sometimes serious, sometimes light, but Frost was never pompous. And that is what one appreciates and enjoys when reading his poetry. Next. In 1998, I was very lucky. My daughter was in Albany, and we planned a trip to Boston and New Hampshire. It was very exciting to visit Frost Place, where in September 1998, we roamed all over that estate, and we saw the poems nailed on the trees, and we went into the museum, and we saw how the artifacts had been preserved, and one felt a kind of a joy, some spirit of the poet and the farmer's eye in the keeping of the place, the flowers, the trees. And I came away feeling very good that had fulfilled some kind of a ache in my heart. We are coming to the themes and arguments in the poems. And the very first poem, which is The Road Not Taken, very popular poem, has been, examined again and again ad nauseum. And Frost himself says that he didn't think so much of it, but it was as was the experience. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. So as for the passing there, had worn them both about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. So Frost took a different path because we find that he enjoyed doing something different. And what attracted him was some kind of a contradiction. And this I will explain further as we go along. And that's why he says a poem is like a momentary stay against confusion. And then we suddenly make up our minds, a choice. And we cannot explain. Next slide. We come to a whole lot of tree poems. Birches. When I see birches bend to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay. Ice storms do that. Often you must have seen them, loaded with ice, sunny winter morning after rain. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored as the stir cracks and crazes their enamels. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering, avalanching on the snow crust. Heaps of broken glass to sweep away. You think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. So they are dragged years afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. Look at the imagery. Until I'd like to think, going to say, when truth broke in, with all a matter of fact about the ice storm, I should prefer to have some boy bend them, take the stiffness out of them. But this particular line, very beautiful, because so was I once myself a swinger of birches. So I dream of going back to be. It's when I'm weary of considerations and life is too much like a pathless wood where your face burns and tickles with the cobwebs broken across it, and one eye is weeping from a twig having lashed across it open. I'd like to get away from earth a while, and then come back to it and begin over. May no fate willfully misunderstand me, half grant what I wish, and snatch me away, not to return. Earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. And so the poet makes very clear that he doesn't want to run away from the world or its problems. He would like to be part of the world. And the same thought he tells us again and again. As in mowing, he says, then next, there never was a sound beside the wood but one. That was my long sight whispering to the ground. What did it whisper? Anything more than the truth would have seemed too weak to the earnest love that laid the swale in rows, not without feeble pointed stripes. And finally, he says, the fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. And this continues with the thought that the farmer is always rooted in the reality of life. He cannot be other than that. Nothing gold can stay. This poem is like a little nugget of wisdom. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaves a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. How the poet talks about the transitoriness, the flux of life, that the ephemerality of existence, that man can never hope to hold on to anything because time and tide take everything away. And so he should like be in nature and part of nature and accept this particular universal truth is brought out again and again and in different ways, quirky, quaint, comic sometimes, but never pompous. We come to another poem. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening is a very popular, lovable lyric, which is quoted again and again. And it seems Nehru had it on his table, and a whole lot of others enjoyed keeping these lines and referring to them.
Watch his words.
Woods these are. I think I know. His house is in the village though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it fair to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year, that's December 22nd, the shortest day. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sound the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. So the magic of the scene has enchanted Frost sitting in his cart, and he is transported into another world. And this particular is a way in which the poet tells us how an attractive temptation presents itself to a human being to stop a timeless moment in the flux. And the poetic impulse is then suddenly countered by a contrary thought, as in West Running Blue, not just a swerving or a throwing back, as if regret were in it and was sacred. And this thought, again, he tells us afterwards, no, I was out for stars. I would not come in. I meant not even if asked, and I hadn't been. And here again in the thought of, when you hear beautiful music, you say, I wish I could die. Or you see a beautiful scene and you say, I wish it lasts forever. And you are mortal, and nature carries on and on, immortal. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I promise us to keep the passion with which nature beckons man is wonderful. But miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. The knowledge that he has his duty, his life, and he cannot succumb, he cannot give in to that beautiful temptation. And this is what is seen time and again in the poem of Frost. This we now come to a very interesting poem called Mending Wall. Mending Wall has been praised as a symbolic poem with far-reaching implications of national borders, of quarrels taken up by politicians, in the voices of two men, one who is younger, whimsical, the poet, and his neighbor, who is very traditional, the older farmer. And it starts with the opening line. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. So he grants that there's something magic, something going on. And that's, he says, elves maybe, that send the frozen ground swell under it and spill the upper boulders in the sun and make gaps. Even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. And so we find that on a given day, he and the farmer decide to meet and to repair that wall. And the rabbits, the yelping dogs, and on a day we meet to walk the line, set the wall between us once again. So borders and nations and how they draw their lines with China, Pakistan, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. Some are loaves, some so nearly balls. We have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. He's all pine and I'm apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines. I tell him, but he only says, good fences make good neighbors. That's the key line, punchline. Spring is the mischief in me. And I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? Here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I would like to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was likely to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. I could say elves, and then if the farmer comes like an old stone savage, armed with a in each hand. He moves in darkness, it seems to be, not of woods only, the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying. And he likes having thought of it so well. And he says again, good fences make good neighbors. Frost triumphs in these contrary aspects of man's spirit in different kinds of human beings and their response to situations, and how you have to respect other people. And yet the poem has an idea. Another poem is After Apple Picking, also a farmer's experience. My long two-pointed ladder sticking through a tree toward heaven still, and there's a barrel I didn't fill beside it. There may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick up. Essence of winter sleep is on the night. I'm done with apple picking. The scent of apples I'm drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight. My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of the ladder round. I feel the ladder sway. Of apple picking, I'm overtired. Of the great harvest, I myself desire. Thus a poet, a farmer, wants the wealth of a harvest, but also the labor that involves it. And this devotion to fact, where the poet is a humble farmer and he's most faithful to the fact and the reality. And this, at such points, is at most lyrical and yet sometimes very rational, because it carries the thought of what could happen if he looked at the world in a different way. We have a lot of tree poems here. At my window, a very favorite poem of mine. Tree at my window, window tree. My sash is lowered when night comes on, and let there never be curtain drawn between you and me. Vague, dream-filled dream head lifted out of the ground, and things like most diffused to cloud. Not all your light tongue talking loud could be profound. But tree, I've seen you taken and tossed. And if you have seen me when I slept, you have seen me when I've taken and swept and all but lost. That day she put our heads together. Fate had her imagination about her. Your head so much concerned with outer, mine with inner weather. And this is the profound thought, because the poet is thinking about how nature has her own living challenges and man has his own. And how do we not understand this particular thought? Fire and Ice is a delightful little poem, lyric. Powerful. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. So his choice is for ice. This poem, Acquainted with the Night, has strangeness, eerie kind of feeling. I've been one acquainted with the night. I've walked out in the rain, back in rain. I've outwalked the furthest city light. I've looked down the saddest city lane. I've passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet, when far away an interrupted cry came up over the houses from another street, not to call me back or say goodbye. Further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. We touched very briefly on the two narrative poems, which I've chosen from north of Boston, in which we find that he has chosen anecdotes and transformed the living speech of humble people as the frame of native veracity, of local characters, and his vivid observations, because these poems talk and they are objective. The poet is looking at a problem. Home burial, I believe, was when he lost his son, Eliot, and so there's some truth in it. We come to the husband-wife and their misunderstanding, their lack of connection. And so the staircase, and the wife is standing, Amy is standing on the top step, and the husband says, "What is it you see? Come down here. Let me come up and see. Why are you afraid? Don't go out here. Don't go sharing your sorrow." And this appeal of the husband is not at all understood by the wife, because she wants to go out of the house into the cemetery where there's a little mound of a child underground. And the husband cannot understand. He would like to go back to work and say, "Don't worry, let's carry on." But she cannot understand, and nor can he understand the load of her sorrow. The particular poem is very touching, quite poignant, the loss of death, of bereavement. We go to Death of a Hired Man. The theme, next slide. Death of a Hired Man is a very curious case of Silas, the workman, in their farm. Warren and Mary find that Silas has departed the middle of harvesting work, and so he has angered Warren, the farmer, who has little or no sympathy for him. And now, after a long time, Silas has come back. Mary is compassionate. She tends to Silas, who has crept back to the farm for shelter. Mary says, he says he'll clear the meadow and clear ditch. Warren is very skeptical about this promise. And Mary tries to convince Warren, and Warren angrily says, "He's got a rich brother. Why doesn't he go to him?" And yet Mary understands why Silas has come to their farm. And she says, home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. And so she shields Silas. And Warren says, "I should have called it something to somehow have to deserve." Now, this a different viewpoint of what is home. And she tells Warren to go in and talk to Silas. And when Warren goes in, he finds that Silas is dead. Now, this is the end of that particular poem, in which it is that somehow the poet conveys that sorrow comes, but if there is some comfort in the last times of one's life, that is how Silas has come to Warren's farm, where Mary understands him. We are now come to the end of we have Robert Frost reading The Gift outright when Kennedy called him to read in public 1960. About the time, this particular poem, a long poem, is not merely what is called as a patriotic love for America, not expressed in screaming, flag waving, but in a salvation of faith, in surrender to the land. And that is why he says, we were England's, still colonial, until we found out that it was ourselves we were withholding from our land of the living, and forthwith found salvation in surrender. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright the deed of gift. after many deeds of war. And this long poem ends, a golden age of poetry and power, of which this noonday is the beginning hour. So this is how Frost conveyed to the world that he was never a great poet or anything, or a great scholar. He says, I'm just a guide, an inspirer. And so he was going to college after college, and people would appreciate his inspiration. And he went on writing poetry, become a Nobel laureate. And he says that he said, we are going to read a little poem. He says that very comically, because I'm telling you, whimsical mood in his 80s, he still wrote poetry. He wrote a teasing couplet. It takes all kinds of in and outdoor schooling to get adapted to my kind of fooling. And this poem, Away. Now I out walking the world desert, and my shoe and my stocking do me no hurt. I leave behind good friends in town. Let them get well wine and go lie down. Don't think I leave for the outer dark, like Adam and Eve put out of the park. Forget the myth. There is no one I am put out with or put by. Unless I'm wrong, I butt away. The urge of a song, I'm bound away. I may return dissatisfied with what I learned from having died. Thank you very much. And I'd like to, how a poem begins with a lump in the throat. Thank you.
Yes. So, I mean, I knew of only a few of these poems. Typically, while growing up, there was always stopping by woods on a snowy evening, right? Because like you said, Nehru had it on his table. I think Kennedy also did, right? John F. Kennedy also was very fond of this poem. So that was the first poem that I read of Frost's. I was just wondering, Kennedy gave Frost this opportunity, to recite his poetry in that sort of august situation. What was Frost's reputation? What was his standing at that time? I mean, did Kennedy give him more of a standing, or did he already have it? How was he looked upon? How did he stand amongst the poets of the United States at that time?
About that time, Moini, all the universities, Tufts University, Harvard, Amherst, had called him to teach the students. And he kept going there, but no airs about him. He kept saying, I'm a symbolic teacher. He didn't want to because he didn't have degrees to his name. That's why the fooling, the no schooling. And he was still confident of whatever he did. And by then, without any kind of the world acknowledging, in America, he was acknowledged poet laureate. And that is how, it seems spontaneous that the poets enjoyed. It took England and Edward Thomas, the Georgian poets, to accept him and then to appreciate his style. And they published 2 of his books, Boys Will and North of Boston. Other books came afterwards, but he kept writing poetry to the end of his life.
Right.
Yeah.
That comment of Ezra Pound's saying that his poem is simple.
Yeah.
And Robert Frost happily added the word subtle.
Yeah.
it's a little dismissive, right? Or what Ezra Pound said. And Ezra Pound had typically said that in a complex age, T.S. Eliot says that of The Wasteland, that in a complex age, poetry also must be complex. So I think Robert Frost shows the opposite, that when poetry is heartfelt, when it spontaneously emerges, and these sort of homespun wisdom that we have in his poems, I think is always endearing, always charming. There are always takers for that. It's always important to have this. I think Tazeen has something.
Tazeen wants to say
I
something.
wanted to add that Mohini, in response to your question whether he was well known, he was nominated 31 times for the Nobel Prize, but he never got it.
Well,
So,
yeah.
So by the time Kennedy calls him for his inauguration, he was already a national figure. So because he'd been writing from the beginning of the century, actually, even before that, 1 or 2 years before the end of the century. So
School days.
Right. Yes. Would anyone else like to?
only deceptively simple, His language is simple, but he's very, very deep.
Yes.
In fact, I think many of us have
Spontaneous.
recited the last one, the road less traveled.
The road
It was
not taken.
school. It is school books, so everyone knows it.
Not school book. I don't meetings, etc. I have read that out as my what I said there.
It's
And,
very easily applicable.
Easily applicable to us all. I think Wispy is also there. She could raise some points. Wispy?
Yes, Satish.
Your take.
I've been listening very carefully to Indu actually pointing out to us that we don't know enough about Frost if we've just seen these so-called popular poems of his. Like Mohini said, we all know Stopping by Woods, and actually Mending Wall is one of my favorites. But I didn't realize, perhaps I haven't studied Frost in detail, and Indu has made me realize that there were so many other poems which sort of made us realize the depth of his feeling for humanity. I think, like in The Death of a Hired Man.
Oh, yes.
That
is so touching. That is so touching.
Yes. So we have to thank Indu for making us understand how much we have missed out if we haven't read all his poems that we now.
There's some newcomers here. Shilpa Gokte, are you there? Shilpa?
Yes.
Your take on that. What do you feel about Robert Frost?
I have read very few poems, but I had the opportunity to teach Mending Walls. And I learned more than I taught because my children were 6th standard children. I don't know what they took home, but I took home a lot.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thing to say, Shilpa. Otherwise, teachers would say, I know everything, but you're teaching 6th standard and getting something concrete from the question that young people ask and the poem that you study. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was. And I remember it very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else is there? Zia? Zia is there somewhere. Zia, can't see you. Badri, I can see Badri there. All right. But Zia, I can't see you. Please speak up. I think more.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few people who just might. Shabir, you?
I mean, I found the poem away. I got to know it for the first time because I'm not so well read. But whenever you are a non-conformist, you could just recite the poem, and you can just express your difference. If you're not part of the crowd, you could just recite it, and you can make a point. That's what I take from it. It's a wonderful poem. So I'm going to search the net and keep it handy. So whenever I have to just say to others that I'm different, then I can just recite away and get away with it.
Yes, you have Robert Frost's support.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Indu, I was just wondering about this poem, Death of a Hired Man, which I had not known. How long is it? I mean,
Pretty long it is. some 158 to 167. It must be about 9 pages. Yeah, about 9 pages or so.
9 pages or so. Okay. Because, I mean, it's so touching, this thing about this hired man who has family. He has a rich brother, apparently. But he chooses to come here because
he doesn't like to go to that brother because he would not look at him. No? I suppose.
Yes.
He kept coming to Warren's farm because there was love, there's need, there's love, and there is work. And
yes.
he was a humble man. He was not, that's how then I think between academics and highbrow and lowbrow, and why he was nominated 31 times and didn't get the Nobel Prize. I'm still thinking of what Tazeen said. There must have been people, highbrow, who felt that he is not graduated from Harvard, and so how can he get a Nobel Prize?
But there are so many writers who have been many times and not got it, I mean, in a way, it's the luck of the moment. It depends who else is on the horizon at that time. But I think it's enough that he was nominated. I mean, that itself, I think, honored him so much.
No, but you remember who was a recent Nobel Prize winner? He had never written a song at all. He had only written songs. And
Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan. Oh, no. But songs, I mean, their lyrics, their words, I mean, I support that. It can be called literature. They're like poems, right?
It's poetry.
I know it was a very controversial choice. Initially, I was a little taken aback and a little shocked and a little upset even, but I think I came around to accepting him as a good choice because the amount of influence that Bob Dylan had over I think 3 generations probably is enormous. I mean, at college,
with the guitar and, being so influential, absorbing the problems of the times.
Yes, and they're beautiful songs. I mean, you listen to
very popular.
Yes, and so pithy, so short, and they say so much. And I was with that choice. I did not oppose it. I thought that was a good choice.
Tazeen, what do you think? What's your take on that?
Sorry, if I may intervene, Satish.
Yes, we speak. Go ahead.
I mean, since we are talking about lyrics and songs, I think a lot of Beatles songs also have a lot of depth in them. Think of the lyrics of Imagine.
Imagine that is such a favorite.
Wispy, Imagine. My anthem.
Yes. Wispy, we have that poem in Satish's handwriting up on the pin-up board in what we call our office, the study. It's there. And every now and then it sort of tears when we rewrite it and put it up again.
Yes.
What a song. I mean, what beautiful thoughts. Yes. I only wish everyone thought that way.
I know. That's sad, isn't it?
That they don't, yeah.
May I also just point out, in apparently very simple poem, Stopping by Woods, one should look at the rhyme scheme, what he's done with it. if I don't have the poem in front of me right away, but like the first verse, first, second, fourth line rhyme. The third rhyme is taken up in the second stanza, and the same pattern is repeated.
The
In
last.
the-
The third. So
Okay.
if you look at that,
Tetram.
yeah, it's a very unusual type of rhyme scheme which I don't think people are focus on. It's done in a manner that sort of escapes notice. But it's I thought it was a very interesting rhyme scheme. If you look at it, you
Yes.
see immediately.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. So Badri, would you like to join the conversation? Badri is going to very soon present his own book. One Dream is Not Enough. That's what it's called. And, when I looked at that book, I remembered another book that we had done in the book club. It's called One Life to Ride by Ajit Harisinghani. Ajit had come and he talked about his own book. This is in the old days when we met at Pune Club. And he's a motorcycle rider who has traveled the length and breadth of the country. And he's done a lot of very exciting, adventurous rides on his own. Fascinating book. We really loved it. And I have a feeling, Badri, that your book is along the same lines, with that sort of spirit of exploration and adventure. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I have been a daydreamer right from childhood. I dreamt that I should be the topmost student in the university. I dreamt that, from zero, where I had no funds with me, I should raise to the highest level of the industry where I started my business. Then eventually, when I had little money, I said, my dream, the other dreams like adventure travels, etc., should be fulfilled. And that's the stage. And this is after 60, after the age of 60, I around 63, I trekked to Mount Everest. I went to South Pole, and we are the first Indians. I'm the first Indian to reach 90-degree North Pole, first Indian to have the polar plunge, North Polar plunge. And, then recently I had driven from Mumbai to London for 72 days, covering 22,000 kilometers. It's a self-driving, and that was at the age of 73. So ultimately what I'm trying to say is that in the book is that daydreaming is a must in life if you want to really enjoy it. And greatest challenge in life is to explore the abilities within you. And, as long as you have a burning desire, you should be able to achieve it. And age is not a bar for it, And another thing, there are so many thrilling and exciting incidents where I said, let problems not dominate you, you dominate the problems and everything would be fine. This is short.
Yeah, so we do look forward to that presentation very much.
Badri, welcome.
Up to next.
At the age of 73, I decided my childhood dream of writing a book would come true. It did. So I wrote a book when I was 73, and at the age of 16, I had confessed to a good friend of mine, who's still a friend, very close friend, that we were in IIT together, side by side, and I told him that I wanted to be an author.
Yeah.
Finally, at the age of 73, I was able to do so.
Yeah, I'm slightly junior. I wrote my first book in 77, 78.
Welcome. Okay, guys.
Excellent. So I think we will wrap up now. Indu, this was wonderful. I mean, I totally enjoyed it. And I love the personality of Robert Frost that you brought out. This unassuming, modest man. And his poetry also is not pretentious, It's not pretentious. It's superficially simple, let's say deceptively simple, but insightful, and the quiet unfolding, of wisdom, of truth. and important values that emerges in his poetry is so delightful and such a pleasure, you know. It's a sort of poetry that you want to read quietly and think about and enjoy. So I think you helped us do exactly that.
It grows on you.
Pardon?
He grows on you.
Yes,
How
yeah,
you
I'm
do
sure.
the thing, he grows on you. And to Badri, I'd like to say that in dreams begin responsibility, is what I tell young people. When he says he's a dreamer, you dream and there you have to fulfill that dream. That is W.B. Yeats. In
Yeah.
dreams begin responsibility.
Yeah,
And
I mean, just dreaming alone doesn't, sorry, dreaming alone doesn't solve the problem. You have to plan, you have to achieve it. You know,
so
yeah. And
responsibility.
there will be a lot of hindrances on the way. You should know how to overcome them. You should have the self-confidence to overcome them.
Commitment.
Yeah, commitment. True.
Okay, Mo, I think
Right.
it's wind up now.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we're going to see Badri the Sunday after next. Next Sunday, we have a very iconic text, The Iceman Cometh by Eugene O'Neill. Eugene O'Neill, another American writer again, the first great playwright produced in the United States. Before O'Neill, the plays that were staged in the United States were invariably British authors. But O'Neill has that pride of place, the first great American playwright. So we're going to be hearing about that. Then on the 13th of Feb, we have Badri. And on the 20th, we have Varsha Ghate talking about the short stories of Alice Munro. Now, Alice Munro is a Nobel Prize winner. And you know, when we're talking about really good writers who have been nominated, but not had the good luck to ever get the award, I think Alice Munro was such a surprise. I think this Nobel Prize took the world by surprise. Alice Munro, I mean, completely unsuspected as a candidate, really, but there she is. Varsha has mentioned the stories that she's going to be focusing on, and I think I've already put them up. I'll check if I have or have not, but we can do that so we can read and be prepared. So, okay, so that's all for today. Many, many thanks to Indu. Indu, did Anil help you with the slides and the tech?
He did, please.
Right.
And
so I want to
don't tell me, don't put mention.
So I'll just say a quick thank you to Anil.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you, Anil.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
And
Yes.
thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody who's here, who came, who participated, who spoke. And now over to Farooq.
Yeah. So next week we are having the program on the eclipses. Last week we had this beautiful program on jazz, and I thank Satish for arranging that. And the program that we have for next week is on eclipses, and it will be conducted by Mustafa Lokhandwala. And let's hope you all enjoy the program. Okay, Mo, thanks.
Farooq, are you playing this?
1 minute. I'll just share it properly. You know, the problem with the with Zoom is that sometimes it just deceives you. It zooms away. Zooms away.
Out of your grasp.
1 minute. I must conquer this damn thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And thus spake Farooq, who is kind of a master at technology.
It's sometimes I think I'll give up. I don't want to delay people now. We are having this program on eclipses by Mustafa Lokhandwala next Saturday, that's 5th. Then on 12th, we have a very interesting program, which is a combination of a gentleman called Hassan Abdullah has written a book on Ghalib in English. And he's going to make a very critical the evolution of Ghalib over his lifetime. So very technical and very deep sort of thing. And I request all members of book club to be present, because the whole thing is going to be in English, but he's also going to explain some of the poetry of Ghalib in English. He'll read it in Urdu, but explain it in English. And it's going to be quite a deep analysis on the evolution of Ghalib. And Mukul is going to be doing the anchoring of the program. And we have a meeting at 9:30 today to prepare for that. And end of the month of February, we are having the waterman of railways, with a lot of work on waterman. That's a Gyanpedia work. So we have the 12th program on Guldasta, and 3 programs are lined up. And I'm trying to get Eraj Barucha to present Salim Ali in the month of March. Let's hope. He is now presently down with COVID. So maybe in March I will get him to speak on this. And at the end of March, we have this guy from Portland going to speak about telescopes and cosmology. So these are the programs lined up. Nasima is still trying to work out what to do in some Urdu poetry. So let's see what comes out. And of course, our friend Thosre is going to be talking about. Yeah, but you still have to get him on the line and talk to him. No, we got him. I've got him on the line. Everything is said, no problem.
He's ready. He's ready.
All ready. So we have the videos with their proper good videos, 46 minutes videos on the leopards of Bollywood, the leopards around Bollywood. And can you imagine leopards in Bollywood? Fine, we won't tell you what it is all about. Come and hear it there. So maybe March we can line up something for him. Yeah, March, first weekend of March or something he's talked about. Yeah.
Right. So quite a banquet, awaits everybody, I think.
Moini, 8th March is Women's Day. So, we are trying to do something. I don't know whether your book club has lined up something on 8th March or something, but 8th March is Women's Day. So, if keep that in mind in case you can push in something.
Actually, 6th of March is Amanda's presentation. That's what is scheduled.
We are planning to do something on Women's Day, around Women's Day rather. Something to do with women poetry in Urdu or something.
Right. Great. That'd be terrific. Okay. So one last thing I'd like to say is that in April, on the first Sunday in April, we are celebrating Shakespeare, as we do every year. We're not waiting to reach the 23rd of April. It's going to be on the first Sunday in April. Several people have already volunteered and told us what they would like to put in. I'm putting it to the people present today. If you would like to present something, you want to recite, enact, speak, do let me know. And slots will be 10 minutes, not really more than that, because after all, it's a variety entertainment, as it were, and attention spans are short. So don't make it very long, make it short and interesting. Okay, thank you, everyone. Indu, thank you. Anil, thank you. And thank you, everyone who came.
Abid, thanks a lot.
And excellent evening. And of course, above all, thank you, Farooq. And thank you, Abid. And Abid was very crucial today to the success. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.